The stitch and flip method in quilting is really useful for making things like a square in a square or flying geese. And I like to use it a lot in my patterns, but sometimes this happens. The edges turn out not quite straight, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on, so I did a little deep dive into the method, did a few experiments, and came up with 3 things to pay attention to while you're doing stitch and flip if that crooked edge bothers you. The first one might be obvious to veteran quilters, but for newbies, it's really all about the pressing. The reason that we even do stitch and flip is because this is a bias edge here, and it's really tricky to keep things from stretching on the bias edge. So by stitching along this line before we cut it, we can reduce some of that stretching and pulling. But if you take your iron and you go yanking on this seam and press real hard, you can mess things up and cause these sort of to be wavy on the top. So that's what happens after you've sewn. What about before you sew? Well, before you sew, you're lining up your squares. And if you are doing a whole bunch of these and you've stacked them all and then you take them over the machine, by the time you get over the machine, they may have shifted a little bit. And if you were to sew on this line now and press on that, you can see this does not come out right because it wasn't lined up in the first place. So one thing that helps is to pin. The last thing is the thing that really surprised me that it made such a difference, and that is where you sew that line. I made up 3 examples here, and I'm going to start by saying it's important to make sure you make this line as accurate as possible from corner to corner. And the next thing is, where are you going to sew in comparison to that line? I have these 2 examples here, one in which I exaggeratedly sewed this side of this line, and you can see when we flip this, it's crooked here and it doesn't quite come up to the center even. So that's what happens if you sew too far this side of the line. The other is if you sew too far this side of the line, what happens? You get a big dip down. So it's important to sew really close to that line. But notice I said really close to that line because what I discovered in all of these examples that I was doing, that if I pretended like this was a scant 1/4 inch seam and sewed just tiny bit to this side of the line, you can see it's just about a needle's width to this side of the line. That's when I got the most accurate piecing of all. So yes, pressing matters, lining those up and pinning them if you need to keep them there, and then also drawing that line really accurately and sewing either right on it, or if you need that extra room for the seams, sewing just towards the corner of it, and that will help your stitch and flips come out nice and straight. This is the kind of thing I like to dig into in my community, Simple Quilting Studio. You can find the link down below. If you really want to understand why you're doing things and why they work, it's the place to be. Happy sewing!